Brutal anger from Lewis Hamilton at his engineer after missing out on the podium in Silverstone. Stay until the end to hear the explosive radio message and Riccardo Adami's reaction. It wasn't the podium spectacle, the waving flags, the booming cheers, the spraying champagne, or the carefully rehearsed celebrations that truly conveyed what unfolded at Silverstone. The truth of that Sunday afternoon, the real heartbeat of the race, wasn't found in post-race interviews or press conferences. It was hidden in the raw, unfiltered tension transmitted through the crackling team radios, in the vocal tremors of drivers confronting the unknown, in the moments when visibility vanished and instinct had to take over where data lost its power. Two men, side by side in the same garage, seated in machines engineered to identical specifications, racing under the exact same sky, saw their fates diverge in the most dramatic way. They shared the same tools, the same weather, the same setup, the same chaos, but their reactions couldn't have been more different. Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton both had the prancing horse stitched to their chest, both wearing the red overalls of Maranello, both strapped into V6-powered beasts meticulously designed for perfection. But as the first drops began to fall and the air thickened with moisture, only one of them showed the clarity and composure required to master the moment. The clouds didn't ask questions. The rain didn't differentiate. The conditions offered no clues, no grace, no certainty. The challenge was uniform, the stakes were universal, the path ahead blurred for everyone. And yet, in that blurred battlefield, one man listened to everything but his own instinct, and the other needed nothing but it. As the storm intensified, as puddles grew wider, as visibility narrowed and grip all but vanished, Charles Leclerc's voice grew louder, not with confidence but with confusion. There was no conviction, only constant questioning. Over and over, he radioed the team asking what to do, hoping for answers from engineers staring at radar screens thousands of meters away, pleading for guidance from algorithms, delaying action in the hope that someone else would make the call for him. His voice didn't carry the tone of a man ready to take control of his fate. It carried the hesitation of someone waiting for certainty that would never come. Lewis Hamilton, however, didn't need consensus, didn't request confirmation, didn't look to the pit wall to tell him what his hands and feet were already feeling. He didn't need to be told what the circuit was screaming. Every twitch of the steering wheel, every microsecond of slippage, every change in the sound of the tires cutting through water was information he processed in real time. The car spoke, and he listened, not with telemetry, but with a racer's sixth sense. On lap 13, when others were still deliberating, when strategists were scrambling for predictive models, when engineers were staring at screen after screen trying to find clarity in a fog of numbers, Hamilton made a choice. A decision that echoed with confidence. Intermediate tires. No pause. No doubt. No committee. No waiting. He declared his intent not as a suggestion, but as an order. And the team followed, not because it was the protocol, but because his voice carried something far more commanding than data. Authority born from experience, intuition born from years on the limit, presence born from greatness. The pit crew didn't hesitate. The mechanics moved like they had fire in their veins, because when Hamilton speaks with that kind of certainty, nobody questions it. His tone was calm but sharp, precise but resolute. He dove into the pit lane with surgical precision, received the tires in a blur of motion, and re-entered the storm as if he had never left. But now, he was armed not just with rubber fit for the conditions, but with rhythm, with synergy between man and machine that transcended numbers and projections. The timing was perfect. The balance was right. And as others struggled, stumbled, and second-guessed, Hamilton found speed where others found chaos. Each lap that followed was not just another trip around the circuit, it was a lesson, a demonstration, a performance. He sliced through the mist not with reckless aggression, but with measured control. He didn't need to be the loudest, the flashiest, or the most theatrical. His message was in his lap times, in the effortless way he danced through corners others tiptoed through, in the steady climb up the leaderboard that felt less like a charge and more like inevitability. Every second he spent on track felt like a moment pulled straight from a masterclass in wet weather driving. While others wrestled with oversteer, fought with aquaplaning, and struggled to hold a line, Hamilton was making progress look easy. He wasn't just surviving the storm, he was thriving in it. By the time the final laps approached, with 52 grueling circuits behind him, he had brought the Ferrari to fourth place, not because of luck, not because of strategy handed down from above, but because he had turned the tide with his own hands. He was stalking the podium like a hunter in the wild, calculating every move, pressing ever closer with timing and patience. He wasn't chasing hope, he was chasing inevitability. His lines were clean, his traction impeccable, and his speed unrelenting. Fourth place on the results sheet didn't even begin to tell the full story. It was the kind of drive that reshaped narratives. It was the kind of drive that made everyone watching, fans, pundits, rival teams, pause and admit they had just seen something rare. Meanwhile, somewhere in the back, a different story was unfolding. Charles Leclerc, despite all his talent, despite all his speed, was disappearing into the shadows. 14th place. Outside the points. Distant. Disconnected. Unseen. He was not battling for glory, he was simply trying to make it to the end. And unlike Hamilton, who cut through the fog with sharpness and instinct, Leclerc sank deeper into uncertainty. His race was not punctuated by daring overtakes or inspired strategy, it was defined by hesitation. His voice on the radio became a recurring motif of uncertainty. He asked, he waited, he questioned. He didn't seize the moment. He deferred to it. When decisive action was required, he remained still. When clarity was necessary, he sought advice instead of making a choice. And the race passed him by. The contrast was impossible to ignore. It wasn't about equipment. It wasn't about external conditions. It wasn't about luck. It was about what lived inside the cockpit, inside the helmet, inside the soul of the competitor. The difference wasn't measured in positions or seconds. It was measured in mindset, in courage, in readiness to lead when everything around you collapses. Hamilton looked inward and found the answer. Leclerc looked outward and found delay. One listened to instinct. The other waited for instruction. One imposed order on chaos. The other let the chaos dictate the terms. At Silverstone, under the fury of British skies, amid rain that distorted vision and blurred reality, a quiet, unspoken truth emerged. Some drivers wait for the moment to present itself, and others create it with their bare hands. Hamilton didn't win the race, but he won something far more important. He won the respect of everyone who knows what greatness looks like when it's forged under pressure. He showed that leadership isn't declared, it's demonstrated. He proved that even in equal cars, the result will never be equal when one driver refuses to be ordinary. What unfolded that afternoon was far more than a standard analysis of lap times or telemetry variances. It transcended the usual metrics of motorsport. What emerged, in raw and unfiltered form, was a psychological portrait of two individuals occupying the same garage, driving identical machinery, and yet navigating entirely different realities. In the midst of swirling uncertainty and atmospheric chaos, one man rose above the storm as if he had been born for precisely this brand of disorder, while the other found himself suspended in a kind of mental fog, waiting for instructions that would never come soon enough. And in that split reality, one shaped by clarity and the other by doubt, the very soul of Ferrari's direction was unintentionally laid bare for the world to witness. This wasn't a battle of carbon fiber or tire degradation. It wasn't about whether one setup was marginally more efficient in Sector 2 or whether brake-wear had altered rear balance in low-speed corners. Those technical nuances, while ever present, took a back seat to something far more primal. What we saw wasn't just a competition between drivers, it was a clash between decisiveness and hesitation, between experience sculpted by trauma and triumph, and potential still uncertain in its own skin. Lewis Hamilton did not merely outperform Charles Leclerc. He outthought him, outread the track, outmaneuvered the conditions, and ultimately outclassed the entire grid with a level of mental velocity that cannot be simulated in any wind tunnel or software model. When the first drops of rain began to darken the tarmac, the paddock collectively held its breath. Every strategist, every engineer, every driver knew that what would come next would not be dictated by pure speed, but by adaptability, by intuition, by the kind of courage that separates the champions from the contenders. And in that crucial stretch, when visibility shrank and grip levels fluctuated corner by corner, it was Hamilton, not the sensors, not the AI, not the predictive weather overlays, who became the most accurate forecaster on track. His senses were sharper than radar. His brain processed variables with a clarity no telemetry could match. He became, in essence, the control center his team momentarily lost. At turn 4, when a brief flash of wheel spin could have led to panic, Hamilton understood it not as a problem, but as a warning, a coded message from the circuit itself. He absorbed it instantly, recalibrated his entire approach, and moved forward without waiting for anyone's green light. At Abbey, His micro-adjustment in throttle wasn't visible to most, but its effect was monumental. Into Brooklands, his slight shift in brake bias wasn't a guess. It was the result of 1,000 subconscious calculations performed in less than a second. These weren't just adjustments. They were expressions of control. They were declarations that no matter what chaos surrounded him, he would be the author of his own race. And what makes it even more staggering is that Hamilton was doing all this in a car that had been fundamentally engineered with someone else in mind. The SF-25 is not a blank canvas. It is the product of thousands of hours of development focused on optimizing performance around Charles Leclerc's driving characteristics. Its aggressive turn-in, its rear-end stability under load, its balance under braking, all of it sculpted to match Leclerc's style, his rhythm, his instincts. Hamilton wasn't just adapting to rain or tire wear, he was adapting to an alien cockpit, a personality encoded into every fiber of the machine that wasn't his own. And still, he turned it into a weapon. What he displayed wasn't mechanical sympathy. It was mechanical dominance. He didn't beg the car to cooperate. He wrestled it, persuaded it, charmed it until it yielded to his will, all while the heavens opened and strategy dissolved into guesswork. It was less about trust and more about authority. He didn't drive the SF-25 as if it were his. He drove it as if nothing on that track could deny him control. Not the car, not the weather, not the silence from the pit wall. On the other side of the garage, the atmosphere was markedly different. As the rain intensified and visibility shrank to desperate levels, Charles Leclerc became visibly consumed by uncertainty. The spray didn't just cloud his visor, it clouded his judgment. The grip didn't merely shift beneath him, it betrayed his expectations. And instead of asserting himself, instead of claiming the moment, he hesitated. He reached out to the team, not with a command, but with a question that encapsulated everything: box. It wasn't a declaration. It was a plea. A request for clarity in a moment that demanded conviction. The response from the pit wall was muddled, laced with ambiguity, caught between analysis and indecision. And in that space, those excruciating seconds of hesitation, Leclerc did not push forward. He waited. 2 laps passed, 2 laps in which he could have seized the initiative, but instead, he drifted further from control. In those minutes, the gap between him and his teammate wasn't widened by engine modes or tire compounds. It was widened by leadership, or lack thereof. It was widened by the inability to make peace with uncertainty and transform it into action. It was widened by a storm that demanded bravery and received passivity in return. No one sabotaged Charles Leclerc. No one on the team orchestrated a failure. The car did not betray him. What failed was the belief in himself to make a judgment call when there was no time for consensus. What collapsed wasn't the machinery, it was the trust in his own intuition. And when the rain finally eased and the strategic picture became clear, the damage was already irreversible. 5 seconds, an eternity in modern Formula One, had been lost not to fate, but to a lack of self-command. And so, in those fleeting laps drenched in unpredictability, a portrait was drawn, not with ink, but with tire tracks and throttle traces, of where Ferrari stands and where it might be headed. One driver proved that leadership isn't given, it's taken. That in the worst moments, the greats do not wait to be told, they tell the track what will happen. The other showed that potential, no matter how bright, must be coupled with resolve or it risks fading under pressure. Hamilton wrote a chapter that will be studied and admired not just for its technical brilliance, but for its emotional gravity. Leclerc, in that same moment, became a case study of what happens when talent is left unarmed by doubt. And in that contrast, so vivid and so brutal, the true story of Ferrari's future was no longer a question of updates or upgrades. It became a question of mindset. One man conquered the elements. The other surrendered to them. And that difference, however temporary it may seem now, could echo through every decision the team makes from this moment forward. Ferrari's ultra-sophisticated decision-making architecture, a labyrinthine convergence of real-time sensor telemetry, advanced weather modeling simulations, neural network-based tire performance prediction systems, and AI-driven scenario planning modules, was built to dominate complexity. Designed to anticipate every nuance of track evolution, to process gigabytes of data in fractions of a second, to suggest the perfect moment for a tire switch or a strategic undercut, it was the crown jewel of Ferrari's technological arsenal. But when reality refused to follow a script, when the skies darkened unevenly over different sectors, when grip shifted unpredictably corner by corner, when strategy needed to pivot not every lap but every few corners, that high-tech brain was paralyzed by its own need for structure. It became too slow, too analytical, too dependent on stable variables that no longer existed. The storm unfolding on track wasn't theoretical. It wasn't programmable. It was visceral, kinetic, a chaos that punished those who sought perfection and rewarded only those capable of making immediate decisions with conviction and without external validation. And sitting inside that high-performance machine, surrounded by blinking displays and algorithmic recommendations that grew increasingly irrelevant with every unpredictable lap, was Lewis Hamilton, unbothered, unshaken, and entirely uninterested in waiting for permission. He didn't need machine learning to tell him what he already knew. He didn't want the safe option, the modeled probability, the conservative Plan C, that required 2 laps of additional data to justify a stop. What Hamilton activated wasn't a tactic. It wasn't a mere override of the system. It was something deeper, more primal. A sixth sense born from 2 decades of surviving the elements, trusting his instincts, making the impossible seem obvious in moments when others froze. What he summoned wasn't found in Ferrari simulation tools or predictive dashboards. It was forged in memories of survival. In the downpour of Turkey 2020, when grip was an illusion. In Germany 2018, when he danced through disaster while others crashed. In Fuji 2007, when torrential rain turned visibility to zero and only intuition separated progress from peril. He didn't require a perfect chassis balance or an optimized tire window. He required lucidity, razor-sharp mental clarity that cut through noise, that ignored the storm and sought only the cleanest path forward. While others waited for confirmation, Hamilton acted. While others wondered about timing, Hamilton decided. And the result wasn't just a fast lap, it was an entire redefinition of what performance meant. His Ferrari, under his command, stopped being a machine and became an extension of will. It stopped reacting to the environment and began manipulating it. The track didn't tame him. He tamed the track. Each corner wasn't merely driven, it was interpreted, negotiated, mastered. While Leclerc's car became hesitant, cautious, burdened by telemetry feedback and delayed instructions, Hamilton's car moved like a blade through silk, precise, fluid, and unstoppable. The gap that emerged wasn't mechanical. It wasn't about who had better tires or fresher rubber or a slightly more optimal strategy. What opened up between the 2 Ferraris was a psychological chasm, a canyon carved not by horsepower or aerodynamic efficiency, but by mindset, by decisiveness, by raw, unapologetic authority in the midst of complete tactical ambiguity. Hamilton wasn't trying to survive the storm. He was the storm. And in a sport obsessed with numbers and telemetry, where decisions are often hidden behind layers of analysis, what Lewis did was rip away the facade and remind everyone watching, engineers, team bosses, fans, that Formula One is still, at its core, about the human being in the cockpit. That no amount of code can replicate courage. That no AI can simulate instinct. Charles Leclerc, as immensely talented as he is, appeared trapped in a loop of second-guessing. Every time his voice came through the radio, it carried a slight tremor of uncertainty, not of skill, but of self-trust. He wasn't asking for technical feedback. He was looking for reassurance. Do I box now? Are we sure about the switch? What's the delta to Plan B? These weren't strategy inputs. They were symptoms. Symptoms of a driver who hadn't yet severed the psychological tether to the pit wall, who still required affirmation before committing, who hadn't yet crossed the line from executing strategy to creating it. His natural brilliance as a driver was there, but it was encased in a shell of procedural thinking, always needing confirmation, always waiting for the nod. In stark contrast, Hamilton's radio messages came like thunderclaps, not louder, not more frequent, but unmistakably definitive. No wasted syllables. No ambiguity. Tell me the window. I've got it from here. He didn't debate. He didn't doubt. He declared. And with those declarations, the energy around him shifted. His words carried weight that no algorithm could match. The engineers stopped analyzing and started executing. The pit crew moved not with the caution of technicians, but with the urgency of believers. Strategists didn't recalculate, they adapted. Not because Hamilton demanded it, but because his certainty created momentum. His faith in his own vision became contagious. He didn't ask them to believe in him. He showed them why they should. Every turn, every split-second choice, Every bold move in unpredictable conditions sent a signal. This is how champions think. Follow me, and we will not lose. This wasn't just about Silverstone. This wasn't just a wet race with a clever call on intermediates. This was a masterclass in psychological warfare within a team, in redefining what leadership looks like from behind the visor. It was a driver, years into his career, with nothing left to prove yet still burning with a level of focus that turns chaos into clarity. It was Hamilton not merely outperforming his teammate, but outcommanding an entire system built to optimize around collaboration and analysis. He bypassed all of it, not out of arrogance, but because when you know, truly know, what the right move is, you don't need consensus, you need courage. And that courage, the kind that can't be quantified, the kind that doesn't show up in sector times or tire temps or degradation graphs, is what made all the difference. Because when the storm came, and the data fell short, and the strategy trees collapsed under the weight of too many variables, Hamilton stood tall, not because of the tools at his disposal, but because of the fire inside him. And for everyone watching, whether from the pit wall, from the garage, from the grandstands, or from the millions of screens around the world, one thing became crystal clear. In Formula One, brilliance isn't just about talent or machinery. It's about who you become when everything around you turns to noise, and you still find a way to hear your own voice above it all. In the unforgiving world of Formula One, where milliseconds define legacies and the margins for error are practically non-existent, there exists a type of influence more powerful than outright speed, more commanding than pole positions, and more enduring than even the most decorated resume. This force is trust, pure, unfiltered belief in a driver's ability to deliver not just when the track is clear and the conditions are optimal, but especially when chaos reigns, when visibility disappears in plumes of spray, when tire temperatures plummet, and when strategy hangs by the thinnest of threads. It is in those moments, those make-or-break fragments of a race weekend, where trust becomes the ultimate differentiator. And Lewis Hamilton, a man who has seen more than 2 decades of Formula One evolution, who has battled titans and outlasted generations, used that very currency not just wisely, but masterfully. He didn't just draw from a reserve of credibility. He reinvested it, lap after lap, creating a return so compelling that it shifted the gravitational pull inside one of the sport's most storied institutions. When the lights went out at Silverstone and the track was still glistening with the remnants of a morning downpour, the stakes were not merely about points, podiums, or even personal pride. They were about control, about psychological momentum, about who would guide Ferrari's trajectory not just for this season, but for the seasons to come. The race became a microcosm of a far deeper battle, one that played out not in headlines or interviews, but in the space between corners, in tire management decisions made on instinct, in the feel of a throttle lift or the timing of a DRS activation. Charles Leclerc entered that arena carrying the expectations of youth, speed, and statistical advantage. Hamilton stepped into it with the quiet assurance of a man who has nothing to prove and yet, somehow, always proves the most. As the field snaked through the treacherous early laps, visibility dropping and grip shifting with every gust of wind and patch of standing water, Leclerc's struggle was immediately apparent. He found himself locked in an exhausting sequence of on-track battles that sapped confidence and shredded rhythm, first fighting Pierre Gasly's tenacity, then fending off Fernando Alonso's wily experience. His radio crackled with urgency, with frustration, with a tone that suggested the car was slipping away from him, corner by corner. He pointed to tire degradation, to rear-end instability, to a setup that didn't quite respond to the evolving track. His language hinted at helplessness, a man not in command of his machinery, but merely surviving it. In stark contrast, Hamilton appeared almost immune to the disorder. He wasn't immune to the conditions. No one is, but he understood how to interpret them. He read the circuit not as a set of obstacles, but as a series of opportunities disguised as problems. Where Leclerc tiptoed into uncertain braking zones, Hamilton attacked with just enough restraint to keep the tires alive. Where others lost time in lapped traffic, he anticipated the ebb and flow, slicing through slower cars as though he had memorized their every move before they made them. His overtakes weren't desperate lunges. They were pages torn from a playbook he seemed to write in real time. Every maneuver felt inevitable, not reactionary. He wasn't faster because he took more risks. He was faster because he took smarter ones, precisely when they mattered most. There were no magic upgrades, no secret software, no revised floor or suspension component that tilted the odds. Both Ferrari drivers had identical tools, identical power units, Identical setups crafted by the same set of engineers under the same pit wall instructions. The difference lay not in hardware, but in how that hardware was translated into performance. Hamilton wasn't merely racing, he was conducting. He transformed the SF-25 into a weapon of surgical precision, one that responded to every input as though it were an extension of his own body. Leclerc, for all his natural talent, fought a car that refused to comply. And the more he struggled, the more visible that struggle became, not just to the fans, but to the engineers, to the strategists, to the leadership quietly watching every telemetry line and onboard replay. When the checkered flag waved and Hamilton crossed the line in fourth, there were no victory celebrations, no champagne showers. But the magnitude of what he had done hung heavy in the air. His 12 points didn't lead the headlines, but they told a story no headline could fully capture. A story of control seized not with words, but with wheel-to-wheel clarity. Of momentum stolen not by politics, but by performance. In a team as historically divided by internal power dynamics as Ferrari, moments like these are rarely forgotten. The race had ended, but the impact of his drive was just beginning to take root. Conversations behind closed doors shifted. Trust recalibrated. Influence, that most elusive of forces, migrated subtly but unmistakably. Inside the garage, as the debrief commenced, there were no dramatic confrontations. No blame assigned. Just silence filled with realization. The people who build the car, who refine the aerodynamics, who simulate every scenario from tire wear to pit window strategy, they had all witnessed something undeniable. Not just a good drive, but a statement. Not just a result, but a shift. Hamilton didn't speak louder than anyone else. He didn't demand a spotlight. He didn't point fingers or play mind games. He let the data, the lap times, the consistency, and the racecraft speak louder than any post-race soundbite ever could. Ferrari entered Silverstone already on the back foot in the championship picture, the gap to Red Bull widening as McLaren and Mercedes clawed their way back into contention. But beneath that obvious narrative was a far more consequential one, a subtle, internal duel for future influence. A battle not over 2025's Constructors' Championship, but over who would be the centerpiece of the team's identity heading into the next evolution of Formula One. Leclerc had held the emotional edge for years, the prodigy, the pole magnet, the face of the new Ferrari. But Hamilton, in one damp Sunday afternoon, reclaimed a gravitational pull that only drivers of his caliber can command. The engineers noticed. The strategists noticed. Even the mechanics, often too focused on wing angles and torque specs to engage in speculation, couldn't ignore the shift. Hamilton wasn't simply a 7-time world champion adapting to new surroundings. He was altering the power structure through sheer driving brilliance. His drive redefined what influence looks like in a modern team environment. Not dictated. Not requested. But earned. Repeatedly. Unquestionably. Relentlessly. As the paddock began to pack up, the implications of that Sunday became clearer by the minute. Ferrari may not lift a title this season, but they are beginning to understand who might lift the team itself. Through the fog, through the pressure, through the tension, one driver showed what true leadership looks like, not in words but in action. Hamilton didn't just complete a race. He completed a transformation. And in doing so, he may have rewritten the trajectory of Maranello's most ambitious project in a generation. In the quiet corridors of Ferrari's headquarters in Maranello, a sense of unease is beginning to take root, not born from panic but from a growing realization that the status quo may no longer be sustainable. The red walls, which have seen legends come and go, are now echoing with difficult questions that no one wants to ask out loud, but everyone is thinking. There's a newfound urgency in the air, the kind that doesn't announce itself with alarms but creeps in through numbers, lap times, driver debriefs, and the tone of hushed conversations between engineers and strategists behind closed doors. Every facet of the operation is now subject to second-guessing and thorough review. Who's logging more hours in the simulator? Who's interpreting the data with more clarity? Whose feedback leads to actionable progress? Whose suggestions are backed by tangible results and not just theoretical potential? Who do the engineers turn to when the car's balance is off and the grip is vanishing? And, more than anything, who do they believe when the margin for error is zero? None of this happens overnight. But Silverstone was not just another race. It was a tipping point, a moment where metrics aligned with instinct and something shifted beneath the surface. The stopwatch may record the visible, but behind the scenes, it's the patterns that reveal the truth. Over the final 30 laps of the British Grand Prix, with the track conditions leveling the field and both cars running identical specifications, identical tire compounds, and operating under the same overcast skies that threatened rain at any moment, one reality became impossible to ignore. Lewis Hamilton, in the very same SF-25 chassis as his teammate, began to erase a deficit that should not have been erasable. He didn't just close the gap, he demolished it, taking back nearly 18 seconds on Charles Leclerc in a straight head-to-head comparison that left no room for excuses. No traffic. No virtual safety car manipulation. No weather anomaly. Just two cars, two drivers, same tools, same tires, same tarmac, and two vastly different results. For an organization as proud and traditional as Ferrari, that kind of performance delta is more than just a number on a spreadsheet. It's a turning point. It's a wake-up call. It's a recalibration of everything the team thought it knew about where it stands and who should be leading the charge into the next era. When the technical department pores over the post-race data, they're not just analyzing tire degradation curves or energy recovery rates. They're asking themselves how two elite drivers, both with proven credentials, could diverge so significantly under identical conditions. And more importantly, they're being forced to confront a reality that transcends talent and touches something more vital: trust. In Formula One, where the battle is fought not just on the track but across strategy briefings, aero development meetings, sponsor lunches, and simulator sessions at 2 a.m., trust becomes the invisible currency that determines who the organization follows when the pressure spikes. And pressure is exactly what Ferrari is under. Pressure from tifosi who demand results, from executives who balance passion with profitability, from partners who invest for exposure but stay for excellence, and from a paddock that never forgets, never forgives, and never stops watching. In this crucible, hierarchy is fluid. Rankings on paper can be erased by a single dominant weekend. Seniority becomes secondary to execution. Reputation is replaced by results. In this environment, it's not enough to be fast. You have to be undeniable. And without ever banging the table, without delivering politically calculated interviews, and without asking for leadership outright, Lewis Hamilton made his case in the most devastating way possible, through relentless, surgical execution. He didn't need to convince anyone. He just needed a track, a steering wheel, and a chance. The effect was immediate, though not immediately visible. Silverstone didn't alter the driver's championship order. It didn't produce a dramatic headline at the top of the leaderboard. But it created something more enduring, something deeper. It planted doubt. It shifted energy. It made people inside Ferrari start to talk in different tones. Not because Leclerc has failed, he hasn't. But because Hamilton showed what happens when greatness meets opportunity. And in a season where Max Verstappen is running unchallenged at the front, extending his empire with every lap, and McLaren has quietly evolved into a surgically precise machine capable of challenging for wins on merit, Ferrari's battle is becoming increasingly internal. Their true competition is not Mercedes. It's not Aston Martin. It's not even Red Bull anymore. The real war is taking place between garage slots, between data streams, between instincts and loyalties, and ultimately, between two men wearing the same shade of red. Inside those walls, it's a psychological chess match, with development tokens, upgrade priorities, and wind tunnel hours being allocated based on not just who is faster, but who is believed to be more deserving of the team's full support. When every hour of development must be justified under budget caps, when every upgrade direction means sacrificing an alternative path, the driver who evokes more certainty begins to shape the car, the team, the mission. Not through politics, but through performance. And right now, that gravitational pull is leaning in one very specific direction. Hamilton's drive at Silverstone wasn't just about lap time. It was about legacy. It was about reminding a team that greatness doesn't fade. It adapts, it endures, and when given the chance, it dominates. He didn't outpace Leclerc with tricks or tactics. He dismantled him with consistency, tire management, apex precision, throttle control, and raw speed when it mattered most. Every sector was a statement. Every clean overtake was a message. Every radio silence was louder than any soundbite. He didn't just outperform, he outclassed. And in doing so, he claimed a role that no one explicitly offered him, but that he made impossible to ignore. Behind the smiling faces and the corporate statements about harmony and teamwork, Ferrari is now at a crossroads. There's no formal declaration of internal conflict. There are no press releases about shifting dynamics. But the signs are everywhere, through who gets more simulator time, who receives the earlier updates, whose car gets prioritized during setup changes, whose feedback engineers act on first. These are the quiet battlegrounds where a team chooses its leader. And make no mistake, after Silverstone, the winds have changed direction. Hamilton didn't need to win the race to win something far more powerful. He captured the soul of the team. He reignited belief. He introduced a new sense of what's possible. In a world as cutthroat and demanding as Formula One, inspiration is not a luxury, it's a strategic advantage. And right now, Hamilton has it in spades. Leclerc, immensely talented and deeply embedded in the Scuderia's identity, now finds himself not in a rivalry with another team's driver, but in a deeply complex, high-stakes internal battle that will define not just the rest of the season but possibly the next several years of Ferrari's direction. And while the stopwatch may no longer be ticking at Silverstone, its echo is still ringing through every floor of Ferrari's fortress. Because what Hamilton did wasn't just race, it was a redefinition of what leadership looks like under pressure. And that redefinition, whether spoken or not, is already rewriting the future. There comes a time in the life of every truly extraordinary racing driver when the car ceases to be the protagonist, when the machinery fades into the background and the human behind the wheel becomes the sole conductor of the spectacle. It's not about horsepower, aero packages, or wind tunnel numbers anymore. It's about grit, instinct, resolve, and the supernatural ability to bend chaos to one's will. It's the moment when technical limitations become irrelevant, when data loses its power, and when strategy calls are secondary to raw willpower, unshakable clarity, and command over every variable on the track, both seen and unseen. For Michael Schumacher, that threshold was crossed in the sodden labyrinth of Barcelona 1996, when he transcended his car's deficiencies and produced a drive so mythic, it became the gold standard of wet-weather brilliance. For Ayrton Senna, it was 1993 at Donington Park, a symphony of precision, creativity, and ruthless efficiency that dismantled the field corner by corner, lap by lap. And for Lewis Hamilton, a man whose legacy is already overflowing with defining moments, the Silverstone Grand Prix in the summer of 2025 may have presented the clearest distillation of what makes him an immortal figure in this sport. Not because he won the race in traditional statistical terms, not because he stood atop the podium draped in British flags, but because he pulled back the curtain on what greatness looks like when the world is falling apart around you. The weekend began like many others in the unpredictable world of Formula One, cloaked in layers of anticipation, speculation, and pressure. Forecasts warned of unstable weather. The car, Ferrari's SF25, was far from compliant. Its balance was elusive, its tire wear unpredictable, its performance window narrow and constantly shifting. The setup struggled in FP1 and was no more stable in FP2. Overnight changes helped, but not enough. The engineers were chasing phantoms in the data. Wind gusts turned corners into traps, and the track temperature danced wildly, destroying strategy models one by one. Ferrari's simulations became riddled with inconsistencies. Nothing behaved as expected. The team appeared hesitant, unsure, second-guessing themselves at every opportunity. The pit wall was flooded with question marks, not solutions. And yet, in the middle of this technical and operational fog, one figure remained immovable. While others panicked and recalibrated, Hamilton stood firm, not just driving, but leading from the seat in a way that only the most complete drivers ever do. He didn't complain about the car's deficiencies. He didn't wallow in frustration. He didn't search for external excuses. He internalized every piece of instability and turned it into fuel for dominance. There was no moment of panic, no overreaction, no accusatory tone over the radio. Instead, lap after lap, there was calm, measured communication. Surgical observations about grip levels. Warnings about crosswinds before they became problems. Tire feedback timed perfectly to prepare the garage. He was reading the race like a grandmaster, seeing 5, 6 moves ahead, controlling not just his car but the psychological tempo of the entire operation. He wasn't racing in the storm. He was the eye of it. Every time strategy fell apart for other teams, every time the weather shifted and engineers scrambled to rewrite plans, Hamilton adapted faster than any algorithm. His throttle application was smoother than simulation models could predict. His tire management bought him laps no one thought possible. When others boxed prematurely or too late, when the pit lane descended into panic and last-minute calls, Hamilton created space to breathe. He didn't follow the race. He reshaped it around himself. He dictated when the team should react. He signaled conditions changing before the radar even caught up. He constructed a new rhythm for the race, one the others were forced to follow whether they liked it or not. Ferrari, a team that has seen genius before, a team that built empires around names like Lauda, Prost, and Schumacher, found itself watching something it hadn't seen in years. Not raw speed, not media-fueled hype, but a level of leadership behind the wheel that changes the trajectory of a team's soul. The Scuderia has always thrived when commanded by titans, not when led by committee or steered by hesitation. They need a voice louder than the data, a force of will stronger than the committee room. And in Silverstone, they saw it again in Hamilton. Not through grand declarations or dramatic moments, but through subtle, relentless execution that didn't just guide the team through the storm, it elevated them through it. Meanwhile, in the other side of the garage, Charles Leclerc faced an all-too-familiar struggle that felt like a painful echo of seasons past. He is an undeniably gifted racer, blessed with talent that no one questions. His qualifying pace remains electric. His commitment on the throttle is breathtaking. But once again, the cracks began to show where the surface needed to be strongest. Strategy calls left in limbo. Pit stops mistimed. Radio exchanges punctuated by uncertainty. His inputs, though often sharp, lacked finality. His pace, while potent, seemed isolated, powerful in the moment but disconnected from the larger chessboard. The decisions he deferred to the pit wall ended up being the very ones that unraveled his race. It wasn't the car. It wasn't the rain. It was the absence of that critical voice, the absence of the captain's mindset in the thick of unpredictability. This isn't a new story. It has played out before, in 2022, when promising starts dissolved into missed opportunities, and again in 2023, when moments of glory were derailed by confusion or a lack of tactical clarity. The pain of those seasons seemed to return like unwelcome guests, replaying in real time. Leclerc, for all his fire, appeared trapped in a cycle Ferrari has seen before, one where immense talent isn't matched by decisive leadership under fire. In Formula One, when milliseconds decide outcomes and the window for choice is barely wide enough for thought, you cannot afford to be reactive. The greatest don't wait to be told. They tell. They don't ask what's next. They declare what is. And so, Silverstone became something far more important than just another entry on the calendar. It became a character test, a psychological battleground, a case study in what separates the great from the generational. In Hamilton, Ferrari saw a figure who didn't just fill the seat, but redefined its meaning. He became more than a driver. He became the pulse of the team. Not just a symbol of experience, but a vessel of transformation. He made sense of chaos, created advantage out of disorder, and wrote a new chapter in a story that many had assumed was already finished. And he did it without fanfare, without bravado, just with the cool, unrelenting presence of someone who knows exactly who he is and what he must do. In that moment, with the world watching, with history waiting to judge, with weather howling and expectations wobbling, Hamilton didn't just compete. He didn't just execute. He dominated not by speed alone, but by control, by composure, by clarity, by seeing a race no one else could see and steering the team toward it. What Silverstone 2025 showed the world is that while cars may evolve, rules may change, and generations may come and go, true greatness doesn't fade. It adapts. It evolves. It deepens. And it leaves no doubt when it takes the wheel. Lewis Hamilton may be in the infancy of his tenure with the Scuderia, but even in this initial chapter of his Ferrari journey, he is fundamentally reshaping the very essence of the team, not through scripted interviews or carefully choreographed press appearances, not via internal debriefs filled with bullet points and strategy jargon, but in the most raw and revealing moments, when the clouds shatter, when the track turns treacherous, and when algorithms fail to provide the answers that only instinct, experience, and sheer will can deliver. It's in those crucial, unpredictable make-or-break seconds, when pressure erodes certainty and noise becomes deafening, that Hamilton becomes the voice of calm, the force of clarity, and the embodiment of a new kind of leadership Ferrari didn't know it was missing. The 2025 British Grand Prix at Silverstone won't echo in memory because of the post-race fireworks or the ceremonial popping of champagne corks. Instead, it will be etched into history books for what came after the checkered flag dropped, a sudden, almost sacred hush across the paddock and within Ferrari's own garage. It was in that unexpected silence, stripped of hype, free of fanfare, that the team, perhaps for the first time in years, truly listened. Not to simulations, not to corporate expectations, but to the one man who had just shown them what a winning mentality actually looks like under the most brutal conditions. And that, in itself, marked the beginning of something seismic. Not a revolution declared with fists or headlines, but one unfolding with eerie precision and total inevitability. Hamilton isn't shouting his way into Ferrari folklore. He's rewriting the script line by line, reshaping the team's identity with every corner he perfects, with every lap he conquers, with every difficult decision he makes look natural. His influence is stealthy, deeply strategic, and increasingly irreversible. Every single stint he drives is a masterclass in pressure management. Every feedback session he leads is an opportunity for others to reframe what excellence demands. While others chase seconds, Hamilton is altering mindsets, exposing blind spots, challenging comfort zones. The way he attacks each sector isn't just about lap time, it's about message, purpose, and intent. It's as if he's saying, without needing to speak, this is what it means to be relentless. With every precision-fueled maneuver, every finely measured word in the engineering briefings, Hamilton is not just adapting to Ferrari, he's re-engineering it from within. The change is not chaotic, not reactive, but systematically deliberate. You can see it in the body language of the mechanics. You can hear it in the tone of the radio comms. You can feel it in the eyes of the strategists who suddenly look like they're not just executing orders, but relearning the art of racing. And so, the transformation continues, silent but seismic, slow-burning but unstoppable. While others see only another line in the standings, those paying closer attention understand they're witnessing the quiet ignition of a new Ferrari era, forged not in shouts and drama, but in every breath Hamilton takes under pressure.